Right by Them, a Magnus Archives fanfiction written by Esperosis and read by Ibis Podfic. Chapter 22. A Vain Attempt. John sat between Tim and Martin's desk opposite Sasha. The box of tapes Basira had delivered sat in the center of the three desks as the four of them tried to sort through them, organizing them by date and trying to find if there were any statement documents they already had that went with the tapes. Basira had delivered it earlier in the day, angered by the cover-up the police resorted to after the Rainer raid. John was sad to see her go, but also somewhat hoped that it was the last time they'd see each other. John was slightly worried that he'd never met Daisy, but that was a good thing. Hopefully, they both stayed far away from the Institute. Now they were left with the tapes, and none of them were quite sure where to start, so Sasha had proposed they get them into chronological order and start at the beginning. It seemed as good of an idea as any. So here they were, sorting a good 200-plus cassette tapes, some of which had labels so worn it was hard to tell what they even said. You know, Sasha spoke up, breaking the silence that had fallen over the group. I've been thinking about the statements. It feels like a lot of things pop up over and over again, you know? Tim nodded. John, you mentioned the same thing. And John nodded in reply. So, I was thinking, it might be a good idea to try and sort them by common themes, Sasha suggested. John smiled as he placed another tape down. That's a good idea, Sasha. We should try and develop some categories to put them in. So, clowns and spiders are definitely categories, right? Tim suggested. There's quite a few spider ones and ones about the circus. Sasha nodded and hummed in approval as she brushed some of the tapes on her desk to the side to make room for a paper and pen as she began fiercely scribbling. And aren't there those two cults? Martin looked between Sasha and John. The burning one, and the one Basira helped take down. The cult of the lightless flame and the church of the divine host. Yes, John confirmed. Martin nodded. Yeah, and they were all about fire and darkness, right? Those should probably be categories too. Fire, darkness, Sasha mumbled as she wrote down. There are the weird meat ones, Tim mused. Like the one crazy dude that nailed meat to his walls. Meat, Sasha added. Lots of statements about monsters and stuff. Like the weird vampires and that werewolf in America, Martin suggested. Monsters. Oh, there was Jane Prentice. Tim perked up from where he began to contemplate something. Wait. She had worms, and there were other, bug-related statements. Should the spider categories be spiders and bugs? John frowned. I don't think so. The spider and the bug ones always feel different to me. The spider ones usually had some kind of control or loss of control in them, while the bug ones always had an unclean feeling to them. Yeah, I'm with John, Sasha nodded. They're similar, but they just feel different. The bugs should probably be a category by themselves. Tim nodded as Sasha continued writing. What about those ones where the statement givers find themselves alone? Like the one where everyone just kind of disappeared, or Naomi Hearns' statement with the graveyard, Sasha pointed out. Isolation, Tim suggested, and Sasha wrote it down, seeming pleased. There are those ones where people get trapped in small spaces, or that one where the guy was falling for 3 days, Martin suggested. Claustrophobia, falling, Sasha wrote them down. Anything else? There are the crazy ones that are somehow real, Tim mused. Perhaps the supernatural, like preying on mentally ill people because people don't believe them? Mental illness? It's possible, John confirmed. Or the supernatural might make them mentally ill. Oh, John, Tim looked at him. You wouldn't happen to know any categories we should add? John frowned as the eye remained silent aside from his typically steady stream of paranoid thoughts. War and violence, maybe? War and violence, Tim asked. Yes. We've had a few statements from wars, and somewhere there's just random acts of violence, like with the Grifter's Bone statement. Perhaps that should be category, John explained. War and violence, Sasha wrote out. Anything else? What about Michael? Tim asked. It's definitely a monster, right? I suppose, John replied. But from what I remember, from my own experience and from what Helen said, neither of us felt entirely sane after an encounter with him. Perhaps he should be in the mental illness category. Tim grit his teeth. So a monster that makes you crazy. Bit of a category overlap. I'll just put it with monsters for now, Sasha decided. Any other categories jumping out at you guys? John racked his brain for any other hints or nudges he could give them, but he didn't want to risk saying anything too important or suspicious with the lies of the ever-watching gaze still trained on his back. So, Sasha put her pen down. We've got clowns, spiders, fire, darkness, meat, monsters, bugs, isolation, claustrophobia, falling, mental illness, war, violence, and I'm going to add a miscellaneous category. Any objections or last-minute additions? We can always change or add stuff later. The three of them agreed, but John couldn't help but notice Martin's worried glances at him. Something wrong, Martin? John asked. Martin trailed off. Just talking about all these different supernatural things and how they affect people. I'm just worried that, what's happening to John is supernatural too? John quickly glanced at Tim and Sasha, who remained silent as their expressions became grim. The silence stretched on, and John knew, while Martin was the only one to say it. All three of them had been suspecting it for some time. "It would explain all the weird stuff," Tim finally spoke, his voice almost silent. "Well," Sasha said, "if it is supernatural, what is it, and how do we fix it?" John started. "Maybe it's possessed," Tim suggested. What?" John spurred. "Yeah," Sasha agreed. "That would explain the dreams. The weird eye thing is using John to feed off people's nightmares." John wasn't sure how to counter that argument, as Sasha was, technically, correct. Perhaps the paranoia is his mind trying to fight back against the monster or tell John's conscious self it's there. "Well, wait," John tried to stop them. "And the weird knowing stuff is like its way of communicating. Or maybe some of its weird psychic bullshit is leaking into John's mind," Tim offered. Sasha and Martin hummed in agreement. "I'm not possessed," John cut them off. "How do you know that?" Tim replied. "Because, for all we know, some weird psychic eyeball monster is gonna turn you into the real-life version of Nightmare Eyeball John." "I know I am not possessed," Sasha hummed, unconvinced. "The eyeball parasite would say that, wouldn't it?" "Good Lord!" John ran a hand through his hair, nearly shouting in exasperation. "What will it take to convince you three I'm not possessed by some eyeball nightmare demon?" "Maybe you could talk to a priest," Martin suggested. "They do exorcisms, right?" "The priest is just going to say I'm not possessed because I'm not possessed," John insisted. "So no reason not to talk to them, then." Sasha grinned. Martin's mouth opened and shut rapidly as he looked between his friends. They wanted him to be possessed because it offered a simple and easy solution to a complex and frightening problem. John couldn't say he didn't sympathize with the desire for an easy solution, or just any solution. "Fine," he begrudgingly agreed. "We can talk to a priest or something." John was already starting to regret this idea, but at least Tim, Sasha, and Martin were smiling. That was how John, 4 days later, found himself sitting in an uncomfortable wooden chair, surrounded by a large cloth with a painted-on demon-banishing exorcism circle that was confident was the first result she had found on Google Images. And in the middle of Georgie's flat, Melanie, the orchestrator of this farce, was currently busy setting up her recording equipment with the help of Tim and Sasha. Martin was helping Georgie set up her own audio equipment for her podcast. John was left to try and get in tune with the demon. This entire situation was completely ridiculous. They had spent 3 days talking to various priests and holy men and women of different religions, and all of them agreed John wasn't possessed. Tim and Sasha had tried a few times to ask them to check again, but just in case, but they were always turned away. John was, foolishly, relieved. Then Georgie, always ever so helpful, suggested they reach out to the paranormal community, for evidence if nothing else. Tim, Sasha, and Martin eagerly agreed. John did so as well, but far more reluctantly. John's second mistake, his first being agreeing to this disaster in the first place, was thinking Georgie would be the one investigating. He was soon proven wrong when Georgie explained she only talked about supernatural occurrences, not investigating them. She didn't even have the equipment for it. Enter a very reluctant Melanie. At first, she wanted nothing to do with John and his possible possession, something John wholeheartedly agreed with. But after Georgie explained what was going on, an agreement from all parties that Melanie could record the event for her channel, and some puppy dog eyes from Georgie, she agreed. At least they seemed to be growing closer, John supposed. John glared at the inoffensive tape recorder lying on Georgie's couch. "Having fun," he angrily muttered at the thing. "Everything all right?" Martin asked. "Yes," John turned to him. "I'm all right." Since you're talking, Melanie glanced over her shoulder at him. Her smug grin hadn't wavered ever since her arrival. "I assume you're in tune with the demon." It would take Melanie 3 good swings with the camera she's holding to concave John's skull. "Unfortunately," John grimaced. "Good." Melanie's grin widened as she secured her camera, and then got some balled-up white cloth from her bag. She threw the bundle at John, pegging him in the chest as he instinctively caught and held it. "Put that on," Melanie instructed him. "What is it?" John asked, examining the cheap-looking cloth. "It's a ceremonial robe," she answered. "It'll help with making sure the exorcism works and the negative energy that's seeped into your clothes doesn't mess with the readings." "That sounds like bullshit," John scowled. "I have to agree," Sasha hummed. "Look," Melanie innocently smiled, "I can't help you if you won't work with me." Martin glared at her. "I feel like you're picking on him." "If you don't want my help, then why did you ask for it?" John opened his mouth, but Georgie spoke before he could say anything. "John," she looked at him, a silent plea to play nice in her eyes. John grumbled but walked off to Georgie's bathroom to change. The ceremonial robe looked cheap and awful, the price tag still attached to it, confirming his suspicions. It was both wrinkled and had awful fold lines. The fabric was thin, oddly shiny, and very uncomfortable, feeling more like plastic fibers than cloth. The design of it looked like someone had cut 3 holes in a bedsheet, stitched some random bits of cloth near the shoulders and chest, and called it a dress. It was very obviously some kind of Halloween costume that Melanie had grabbed from a Halloween store and called it a day. He took a deep breath from his nose, stalled for a minute longer as he carefully folded his shirt and trousers, and then walked out of the bathroom. Melanie immediately snorted upon seeing him and turned her head to try and disguise her laughter as Martin gave her evil eyes. Tim winced. God, that's awful looking. It was £10 at the shop, John glowered. This was all, Melanie giggled. I could get you on really short notice. Yes, I'm certain that's the reason, John sighed as he placed his clothes back to the side. I think we're all set up. Melanie gummed slightly, even as the smug grin remained smugly on her face. How are things on your end, Georgie? I'm all good here, Georgie confirmed. All right, I'll run a few tests and we'll get started, Melanie confirmed, and the archives crew, no longer needed, gravitated towards John as the two content creators checked their equipment. How are you holding up, boss? Tim asked, his voice low. John gave a tight-lipped smile. I'm getting the feeling Melanie's primary motivation is humiliating me. But she does know what she's doing, Sasha sighed. And if she does stuff properly, which I think she will, this will help revive her YouTube channel, so she's at least motivated not to screw this up on purpose. I know, John quietly replied. I don't think she's going to be unhelpful. I just don't anticipate this being a pleasant experience. We're here for you, John, Martin softly reassured him, and we appreciate you doing this. But don't feel like you have to, okay? We want to help you, but if you're uncomfortable, I'm all right, John smiled at him. Trust me, this is hardly the worst thing that's ever happened to me. The three looked at each other concerned, and John frowned as his comment seemed to have the opposite effect as to what he intended. I just mean, I can handle some light humiliation from Melanie. Well, Tim clapped him on the shoulder, his voice still low. If she gets too out of hand, we can switch the genre from supernatural horror to action, Tim winked. Tim, I'm pretty sure she has a knife in her boot, Sasha frowned at her. She does, John confirmed. Tim grinned. I bet I could still take her. All right, Melanie clapped her hands together. Everything's looking good. Tim, you can take the larger camera. Your job is to keep the camera on me and Georgie the whole time. Switch between us to focus on whichever one of us is talking. Don't worry about John. All stationary cameras are focused on him. Sasha, you've got the ghost quarter. Just keep an eye on the viewfinder and focus on anything that looks weird, but primarily focus on John, Melanie explained. Roger that, Tim nodded as he hefted the large camera onto his shoulder, his eye on the optical viewfinder. Sasha picked up the small camcorder and frowned at it. Is this infrared? Yeah, it helps with picking up on cold stuff in operations, Melanie confirmed. John glanced over at Martin and Georgie as Martin wrestled with a large pole with a large microphone at the top. He sighed as he looked around, taking in all the stationery and handheld cameras surrounding him. I feel like I'm on TV. You basically are, Melanie replied. Now, I'm going to sync the audio and we'll get started. Melanie walked around the room, clapping in front of each camera before coming to a stop in front of him, facing away from him and towards Tim's camera. Everyone ready? She asked. Everyone made various noises of agreement. Is it too late to change my clothes back? John asked. Yes, Melanie told him, before taking a deep breath and grinning from the camera. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ghost Hunt UK. We've got a special episode for you this evening because tonight we're actually doing a collab with your favorite paranormal podcaster, Georgie Barker from What the Ghost. Tim swung the camera to look at Georgie sitting in front of her recording equipment. Hey guys, Georgie here. It's nice to see you and all. If you're interested in in-depth analysis and interviews about what happens in this video, come check out my podcast after watching this video. Definitely do, Melanie grinned as Tim's camera was back on her. Because tonight, instead of investigating a potentially haunted place, we're investigating a potentially haunted person, she explained. Tonight, we're going to investigate and hopefully exorcise Georgie's ex-boyfriend. My name is John. John pinched the bridge of his nose. He's the head archivist of the Magnus Institute. Please don't tell them that, Jordan growled. It's fine, Melanie waved her hand. Your boss is cool, he won't care. Tim, Sasha, and Martin all made simultaneous noises of doubt and disapproval. John sighed. Anyways, why'd you dump him, Georgie? Melanie asked. I mean, I can think of a few reasons, but I'm curious what the straw that broke the camel's back was. It was a mutual breakup. John resisted the urge to sigh again as he glanced at Martin, who seemed keenly interested as he stared at Georgie. Sure, Melanie rolled her eyes, and Tim pivoted the camera to Georgie. He's actually right, she shrugged. We were really good friends for a long time. Figured that maybe we should date. Dated for like 8 months and decided we weren't really interested in each other like that, and we went back to being friends. It took 8 months to realize you weren't interested in each other. Martin continued to stare at Georgie as Tim switched the camera to him. Georgie shrugged. We were really good friends and flatmates. Anyway, Melanie waved her hand. He thinks he's possessed by an eyeball, and we're going to investigate. I don't, Ashley. John gave us the urge to sigh again. Everyone else does. By which I mean Georgie, Tim, Sasha, and Martin. Tim filmed Georgie as she nodded and swung the camera around to catch Martin and Sasha nodding as well. Speaking of which, John's assistants have been kind enough to act as your assistants tonight. Melanie continued. We've got Martin Blackwood. She gestured at him. Martin waved awkwardly, fumbling with the microphone as Tim filmed. Sasha James. She gestured at her. Sasha grinned and gave a peace sign while holding the camcorder aloft as Tim pointed the camera at her. And Timothy Stoker. Melanie gestured forward to Tim. Walking a few steps in front of the large stationary camera pointed directly at John and stuck his face into view. giving his trademark smile. Now that the introductions are out of the way, let's get into the issue at hand, Melanie concluded. Georgie explained all the known symptoms with minimal introductions, corrections, or elaborations from Tim, Sasha, or Martin. Now, that doesn't sound like anything I've heard of before, but this should be interesting. Ready to get exercise, John? Melanie grinned. Sure. John grinned, his lips tight. The next hour and a half consisted of various tests, reading, and purifications to try and expel the demon, none of which worked. The only notable events were that, whenever Melanie needed to use any device, she insisted on holding them way too close to his face to get proper readings, which she handed him a Ouija board and told him to channel the demon, yet didn't accept when John insisted it was the demon and not him that spelled out Melanie sucks. It didn't help that Tim was very enthusiastically shouting out the letters and making random guesses as John spelled. And lastly, when Melanie poured 10 different essential oils and an entire water bottle full of holy water over his head, the pair of them maintained silent eye contact for the entire duration that the water poured out to him. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more ghost hunting content because I have some amazing stuff in store for you guys. So stay tuned. Melanie grinned, and then a moment later she deflated. Right, that should be that done. Well, Tim said he lowered and put down the camera. On the bright side, a lot of the footage was pretty hilarious. So you could make a funny video out of it. It's not a scary one. I have to agree, Georgie said. Honestly, you two have great on-screen chemistry. What? Us? Melanie pulled her face as she glanced at John. You're joking. I'm not, Jerry smiled. Not happening. Melanie scowled, and John merely sighed and shook his head. While the exorcism had failed, John was actually quite pleased with how tonight went. Sure, Melanie had tormented him on camera and he was soaking wet and covered in strongly smelling oil, but the animosity from Melanie seemed to fade as time went on. She still certainly didn't like him, but gave him hope that one day they might actually be able to become friends. So, think you two could do a joint interview for me tomorrow? Georgie asked. Can't tomorrow, my flight leaves, but then I'll be in India for about a week, Melanie hummed, as she began packing away her equipment. What? John suddenly panicked, bursting out of his seat. Everyone stared at him wide-eyed. I'm going to India, Melanie scowled. I found a lead at your library. You can't go to India, John sputtered. My flight leaves tomorrow, so yes, actually I can. Melanie, John pleaded, don't go. The things, oh my God, Melanie yelled. I've had it with you and your high horse bullshit. You can't control me. You can't stop me, so get out of my way. I'm trying to help you. John stood his ground. He didn't want to fight her, but he couldn't back down. Not with the disaster right on the horizon. Melanie! John! Georgie shouted, and fixed both of them with a stern glare. John and Melanie immediately shut up, and Georgie deflated. John, you're always welcome here. But for now, I think it would be best if you two weren't in the same room, and... I get it. John's eyes were glued to the floor. Her equipment's all over the place. I'll just, go then. I'm sorry, Georgie told him, and John awkwardly grabbed his clothes and shuffled to the front door, pulling his socks and shoes back on. Tim swung his jacket over John's shoulder as he too, along with Sasha and Martin, put on their shoes. Goodbye, Georgie, Sasha called back to her as Martin opened the door. Bye, guys, she gave him a small smile back. Once the door was shut behind them and the four were making their way into the night air, Tim turned to John. So, boss man, any particular reason you were so adamant Melanie didn't go to India? She's on the trail of something dangerous. I don't want her to get hurt, John explained. Maybe it's karma, Martin muttered barely. John shook his head. Not this. So, Sasha asked, what's the plan? John grimaced. It's drastic. Sounds fun, Tim grinned. But John once again shook his head. I'll be doing this on my own. I just need you three to keep an eye on things for me. Sure we can't help? Tim asked. He wouldn't put anyone else in danger. Yes, quite sure, John told him. None of them seemed to like that. Fine, Sasha crossed her arms. But we want to hear what this plan is first. John sighed, and then he explained.